long time ago, and this planet would be all but unrecognizable to you. Nothing at all stirred on the land except the wind and the dust. Not a single blade of grass waved in the wind, not a single cricket chirped, not a single bird soared in the sky. All these things were tens of millions of years in the future. Even the seas were eerily still and silent. For the vertebrates, too, were tens of millions away in the future. But, of course, there was an anthropologist on hand. The anthropologist is a guy who studies humans. What sort of world would it be without an anthropologist? He was, however, a very depressed and disillusioned anthropologist, for he'd been everywhere on the planet looking for someone to interview. And every tape in his knapsack was as blank as the sky. But one day, he was moping alongside the ocean. He saw what seemed to be a living creature in the shallows offshore. There was nothing to brag about, just a squishy blob. But it was the only prospect he'd seen in all his journeys, so he waded out to where it was bobbing in the waves. He greeted the creature politely, and was greeted in kind, and soon the two of them were very good friends. The anthropologist explained as well as he could that he was a student of lifestyles and customs, and begged his new friend for information of this sort, which was readily forthcoming. And now, as he said, I'd like to get on tape, in your own words, some of the stories you tell among yourselves. Stories? The other said, you know, like your creation myth, if you have one. What's a creation myth? The creature asked. Oh, you know, the anthropologist replied, the fanciful tale you tell your children about the origins of the world. Well, at this, the creature drew itself up indignantly, at least as well as a squishy blob could do, and replied that his people had no such fanciful tale. You have no account of creation, then? Certainly we have an account of creation, the other snapped, but it is definitely not a myth. Oh, certainly not, the anthropologist said, remembering his training at last. But I'd be very grateful if you would share it with me. Very well, the creature said. But I want you to understand that, like you, we are a strictly rational people who accept nothing that is not based on observation, logic, and the scientific method. Oh, of course, the anthropologist agreed. So, at last, the creature began the story. The universe, it said, was born a long, long time ago, perhaps 10 or 15 billion years ago. Our own solar system, the star of this planet, and all the others seem to have come into being some 2 or 3 billion years ago, for a long time when they lived here. But then, after a billion years or so, life appeared. So, aside. That sounds kind of like Big Bang, right? Sounds like this jellyfish knows what he's talking about. Excuse me, the anthropologist said. You said that life appeared. Where did that happen according to your scientific account? The creature seemed baffled by the question and turned a pale lavender. Do you mean in what precise spot? No, I mean, did this happen on the land or in the sea? Land? The other asked. What land? Oh, you know, he said, waving toward the shore. The expanse of dirt and rocks that begins over there. The creature turned a deeper shade of lavender and said, I can't imagine what you're giggling about. The dirt and rocks over there are simply the lid, the vast bowl that holds this thing. Oh, yes, the anthropologist said, I see what you mean. Quite, go on. Very well, the other said. For many millions of centuries, the life of the world was merely microorganisms swimming helplessly in a chemical broth. Little by little, more complex forms appeared, single-celled creatures, slimes, algae, polyps, and so on. But finally, the creature said, turning quite pink with pride, he came to this climax of his story. But finally, jellyfish appeared. And that is the end of the story. What was the end of the first story?
Jellyfish.
And the first one was now it's jellyfish. But this story sounds a little bit like the Big Bang story, except it just ended a little bit earlier than we ended. But just think about whether we still think that the story ends with us. Or it goes on. About 10 years ago, when we first got involved with the Ridge Valley Charter School, I was exposed to people who had a really different take on the role of the human in the world. I'd always had a very liberal, progressive view of the world, but I was also, unquestionably focused kind of without thinking, just because it seems so ambient to me that humans were the focus of the world, and that they were the preeminent species and entitled to every privilege and every bounty that Earth could provide. I certainly thought that it should be equal and, all those good liberal things that we think. But everything I thought was based primarily on what would make life better for humankind, and I did not see us as a part of the world per se. I remember saying with great moral conviction that I loved animals, but I had a very clear line between humans and animals. Today, even though, certainly in my daily life, that's kind of how I proceed, it's a less, the line is not as clear. I'd like to have a conversation today about some of the ideas that changed my point of view and just gave me kind of a different perspective. And if everybody doesn't talk, it's going to be a really long 45 minutes as I throw out these ideas, okay? So please talk as we do these things. In today's story, the jellyfish believed that with all his heart, the jellyfish has a heart, that he was the pinnacle, the epitome, the be-all, and the end-all of evolution. He was the whole point of evolution. Does this sound a little bit familiar to us? And I think even without thinking, we do think. Most of us don't go around thinking that we are a point in the evolutionary cycle. We think that perhaps we will make things better with our technology. Certainly the idea that of subduing nature, of conquering nature, is something that's just kind of bred into us, even if we can kind of look at that and say, perhaps that's not the way it should be. Some of the things that I came across as I was working on this is the idea of speciesism. Speciesism is the idea that human beings believe that they can exploit animals because they do not belong to the species Homo sapiens. The other concept is that of anthropocentrism, which is the philosophical viewpoint that humans are the central or the most significant entities in the world. It's a basic belief that is embedded in Western culture. Certainly the Genesis story is people come, are it. That's the whole point. And even in the Big Bang story kind of ends with us. We can look back and say that, yes, this is how we think things came to be. And just like the jellyfish, we can say, yeah, it was tens of billions of years ago, and there were all these single-cell animals, and at the end there was man. And then, but we think that life is sacred, but when we say that, we're talking about human life being sacred. How many times can you take an hour ride down Route 206 and see about 20 or 30 dead animal carcasses on the road? Certainly, a result of their interaction with the human. So, one of the things that I think that I'd like to talk about is how that plays out in our culture and how it plays out in our everyday life, and what is the myth that we use, as you use, and how does that justify our hierarchical perception of humans versus the rest of the members of the web, both sentient and non-sentient. The little thing I have here. This was the story that I read about the jellyfish was from the book called Ishmael, which was written by Daniel Quinn. He also has a website, and he's got lots of little parables and things on this. And this is one he wrote too. And I thought that this really kind of hit home to our way of thinking in many ways. The ship was sinking, and sinking fast. The captain told the passengers and the crew, "We have to get to the lifeboats. We have to get them into the water right away." But the crew said, "First we have to end capitalist oppression of the working class. Then we'll take care of the lifeboats." The women said, "First we want equal pay for equal work. The lifeboats can wait." The racial minority said, "First we need to end racial discrimination. Then seating in the lifeboats will be allotted fairly." The captain said, "These are all important issues, but they won't matter a damn if we don't survive. We have to get the lifeboats into the water right away." But the religionists said, "First we have to get prayer back into the classrooms. This is more important than lifeboats. The pro-lifers said, first we have to outlaw abortion. Fetuses have just a right on that lifeboat as the rest of us. The pro-choicers said, first acknowledge the right to abortion and we'll be glad to help you with the lifeboat. And the socialists said, first we distribute the wealth, then we can all work equally on the lifeboats. Finally, the boat sank. None of the lifeboats had been lowered. Everyone drowned. The last thought of many was, I never thought that solving humanity's problems would take so long, or that the ship would sink so suddenly. You know, and I think that's a real struggle for us as we make human problems, which are real and important, and you know, of great philosophical import and practical import, but we've got this world that is in so much trouble with the whole world, the planet, and where we put that. There was in the Times a couple of weeks ago, there was a story about his day in court, which is story times, about it's about an attorney who is suing the state for a chimpanzee. The chimpanzee has actually brought suit. There's a legal part that I don't quite get all the intricacies to, but the lawyer is representing him as a person, not a human being, but as a person, because he's being kept in captivity. Of course, this raises all kinds of questions about whether or not we have the right to keep other beings in captivity. And one of the quotes that I thought was most interesting was that one of the judges who was hearing the case said, the special status that we humans accord ourselves is based not on tests or statistics, but on a moral intuition deeper than any reason could be given for it, and impervious to any reason that you or anyone could give against it. So there is an inherent irrationality at the heart of humanity's sense of exceptionalism. The idea that we take precedence over everything and see it kind of in our daily lives, and certainly on a larger scale. There is, Phil's going to laugh when I say this, and I only know this because I looked it up like 2 days ago. But there was this 18th century English philosophy for Jeremy Bentham, who was one of the first people, I guess, to talk about the idea of animals and humans. And the question is not, he said, can they reason? Can they think? But the question is rather, can they suffer? And that is in contrast to thinking, you know, we're all very moved by the plight of the other primates. You know, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. But that's because they're like us. So we think that if something is like us, it has more value than something that is not like us. And Bentham's point of view would be that it is, can it suffer? And that should be the benchmark. And I don't know, I guess I should have some question things to start the conversation going, but somebody say something now, okay? I got other stuff to say, but I'm just very proud. Yes?
Well, I guess goes to the arrogance of people is that in that if you took the time it took, you know, from the one cell to us and put it against, you know, in the infinite depth of time, it's only a tiny little blip. So and there's no reason to think that, who knows, another million, 2 million, billion, there will be another higher form of life than us. It makes sense. Why should evolution stop with us? Maybe if that's considered, then people will be a little less arrogant about those things.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, as far as suffering, there's certain symptoms that we can see maybe with our senses. We can perceive with our 5 senses. But there may be a certain type of suffering that we don't have the the capability to perceive.
Yeah.
In other words, like say for instance, a plant, or, I mean, you can generally see when an animal's suffering, but you can see a forest suffering, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got it.
So it all goes by perception.
Yeah.
What is our perception of suffering?
Mm. Well, I think we base it on, again, on what it feels like to suffer as a human. And so we can kind of do that, particularly like with domesticated animals. We're really kind of very good at that, but then you take it a little bit further. And even like thinking about a fish, you know, we think, well, maybe that doesn't suffer so much when you stick a hook in its cheek. Or a lobster, you know, when you're throwing it in the pot, because a lobster somehow seems a little bit less than a fish. And then further down, and I don't know, sometimes I think everything just wants to live. Everything that lives wants to live.
Yeah,
I always say that my dad, my conservationist dad, raised 3 conservationist kids who come at things from very different ways. The Genesis story with the dominion. I have 2 brothers who very much see the Bible said we need to take care of the earth. And they absolutely come at it from that direction. As a sense of stewardship, and their sense of stewardship is very much based in that kind of thinking. And I think that that's a very, that while our goals might be the same, I feel like I come at it more from the interdependent web of life, and also even the concept of Gaia, where the concept of Gaia is that the earth is in and of itself alive as an entity, which is a very different way of thinking than it's just a thing that we're all on top of.
I think that I think that's kind of, it's very hard in this culture to stop thinking of ourselves as just being on top of. And in sometimes I think about, the globe and all the roads, all the asphalt roads we've put on. What do we do? We need those roads, but I kind of think of it as like black electrical tape, just circling the globe and just tying it up. But where do we go? How do we backtrack from that?
I wanted to backtrack to the question of suffering. I think if you want to know if a bee or a plant or a tree or anything is suffering, or maybe even a fish, you may want to ask a child because they seem to be more in touch with it all. And if you ask a fully grown adult, because a fully grown adult is also conditioned, whereas the children have less conditioning. Because I remember what it was like when I was small, and I felt right in the cells of my body when I saw the hook going through the fish. Its mouth, I could feel it, and I felt the crack going into the pot. It was turning red. It was resonating with me. After that, when I said after all this work, I thought you were going to eat some of our crab meat. It's so good, And I just couldn't. So that's one way of telling about suffering. But I was thinking about what you said about the electrical tape, and what's really been on my mind a lot is when I see these old malls and strip malls they're out of use now. And some of them have been out of use for 10 years, 20 years. And, you see the weeds coming up. But there's this huge amount of blacktop that's covering. And you can see life wants to come back. And it's taking so long. And if they would just rip up that stuff and just, let it come. Because when the economy went down, a lot of those shopping centers they're like almost permanently out of business, And I see it everywhere. I see these huge parking lots, like a small business, like they were projecting they were going to have a whole lot of, tons of cars wanting to park there. And you see a few little cars in one strip, and then there's this huge parking lot around it. It's just like my heart was, oh God, what are they going to do with all this place here that there's no cars coming, And so that's like more of that electrical tape. So
Yeah, I know. I think exactly the same thing.
if they're really thinking about the earth, they would tear some of that up. But they're not. They're not thinking about it. So
Yeah, that's
it's a shame.
the Thomas Berry in the Great Work, which I guess his first book talked about exactly that. Where's this that he said? He talks about the developers, the developers, he says that the primary political divisions in today's world are between those with an ecological or environmental worldview and those with a human-centered developmental worldview. And he breaks those down into developers versus and environmentalists. Developers see human needs and desires as primary. Environmentalists see the earth community as primary. Developers expect nature to adapt to human activity. Environmentalists ask humans to adapt to nature. Developers exhibit a low sensitivity, in general, exhibit a low sensitivity to the concerns of the earth community. Environmentalists are driven by painful high sensitivity to other beings. I don't think he's talking about developers in the sense of somebody who, the way we use the term most of the time, but it's a more generic term. But I think it's very hard to stay in this world that we've created, to stay in the environmentalist frame of mind. I buy my meat at ShopRite, and I know that there are some kinds of meat I won't buy, and I will always buy cage-free eggs, but I know that most of that cow and certainly most of those pigs probably and those chickens had a pretty miserable life before I ate them. But it's still very difficult. I drive an hour to work on asphalt. It's really hard to know how to, even with an increased sensitivity, what to do about that. And what do you do? With the asphalt, in these vast parking lots where nobody's coming, so much for building that they will come. And then, okay, you dig it up, and then where do you put it? Where does this stuff go? How do you make the asphalt go away? Barry also said that what we are losing is our sense of awe about the natural world. With our, I know I'm singing to the choir with this, but our idea that of subduing nature, of conquering nature, we have set ourselves apart from the world, and it's a false separateness. We can't be separate from it. I can go that far.
I have a short story to tell about unnatural adaptation. I was out doing wildflower photography one day and I ran across an abandoned asphalt parking lot, and much to my surprise, popping up out of the asphalt was a milkweed, Asclepias, and it went right through, out through the asphalt. So that's what I call unnatural adaptation. I don't like it. I see it sometimes when I see junk around and I see a rare flower growing up through the junk alongside of it, but I think it's really pitiful that that's one of the things that's happening.
The other thing that Barry said is that with physical loss, of the diversity around us, is the degradation of the interior world of the human. to lose the wonder and majesty, the poetry, music, and spiritual exaltation of the deep mysteries of existence. He said that impoverishes our souls. You know, I think about like what we have lost in terms of our imagination, our creativity, and even our capabilities. When you think back to what people could do 200 years ago, that we would have no clue what to do. If the grid went down and we lost our technology, you know, suddenly we have to go out and individually build a shelter, never mind a house, build a shelter from, where would we be? You know, I mean, it seems to me that our I'm going to call it growth, but our acclimation of new knowledge has pushed out old knowledge that in a natural world would be necessary to survive. How many of us could make a rake? If Dave were here, he would probably know how to make a rake. But not too many of us would know how to do that, how to make a tool without it taking so long that whatever tool we needed was obsolete.
I don't need a microphone. I think, unfortunately, all three stories epitomize the narcissism of self-awareness. First, in creating night and day, and this and that's because we need night and day.
Right.
Not every creature on the planet needs it, or it would be very different. And the stars and so on. And then the jellyfish, we anthropomorphize in the jelly, or in other words, put human characteristics into the jellyfish, and all of a sudden it becomes sentient, and the world revolves around the jellyfish. Therefore, the jellyfish is us. Very narcissistic. Same in the third story. And it even goes down to like conservationism, okay? Even yourself, you said, I drive on an asphalt road. What about the pollution that your car creates? And then you have zero emissions cars, and people feel good about themselves, but there's no such thing as a zero emissions car. So when you plug in your electric car, you're just centralizing what you're making the pollution, but you feel better about yourself. You're creating nuclear waste, you're creating burning coal or natural gas to charge that electric car. Yeah, it's great if you're in the Lincoln Tunnel and everybody's idling and stuck in traffic because it's zero emission at the point of use, but you're still polluting, but it makes you feel better. For quite a while, I was very involved in the solar industry. People who are not wealthy could never afford it, okay? You think it would be great for people, to put it on their house because it would reduce their electric bill, but it's insanely expensive even after rebates and everything. The best customers I had were rich people, like Dan at Ringo's, who had 7,500 square foot mansions, would put up solar, we'd put up solar water heating and solar heat their pool, and solar electric on the roofs of their houses, because it made them feel good about themselves that they just spent $75,000, after the rebates, to have a 7,500 square foot home that has a 3,000 square foot home carbon footprint. So it made them feel better about themselves. So I mean, it's all narcissism. It's as soon as you become self-aware, even in the conservationism, I'd probably have to say maybe some of the best conservationists are more like the the Quakers and so on, drive a horse and buggy and so on. But even breeding cattle to eat creates huge amounts of carbon waste with the with their methane and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, I just think self-awareness or sentience just breeds narcissism, and so on, and it's very unfortunate. There's very, very, very little altruistic behavior out there anymore.
Well, it's really difficult. I think your point is very good about it's how hard it is to do this unless you have a whole lot of money, and if you have certainly for people who are really poor, it's almost impossible. There aren't even grocery stores in their neighborhoods, and perhaps their footprint truly is smaller because they don't have cars or walking places. But organic food is so much more expensive. And cars, as you point out, a low emissions car is average for a lot of people. The lower down the human food chain you go, the harder it is. And yet the other idea that I was kind of thinking about as I was putting this together is the idea of infestation. And infestation, I know what I thought of that, but infestation is the, it was put better than I could put it. It was a nice quote. Well, anyway, it means when something overruns a system to the point of harming it. I mean, if we had as many cockroaches, well, maybe we do have as many cockroaches. If we had as many cockroaches of our size living on this planet, we would certainly call it infestation. It's as though we have infested the world and we're just sucking things away from it. But I think Thomas Berry talked about what we need to do, and that is to become self-aware and to do the great work. He described the great work as, I hope I have this quote. He said that this generation's great work is the transformative effort to change human-earth relations from disruptive and destructive to mutually enhancing and beneficial. I think an awful lot of us feel completely discouraged, you know. You said this, like, where do we begin? You know, we begin and we eat organically, or we become vegetarians, or we try and be aware of our ways to try and reduce our consumption. But I think for many of us, it feels just overwhelming. That'll be a good time for somebody to say something.
I'll say something.
I can make a count on your hand.
You can always well, I don't have any problem with eating boiling lobster alive because it tastes good. Because they get the, you know, it's no different than a lion when it attacks an antelope. It doesn't think about how the antelope feels when it rips its flesh off. So I don't think it's much different. The other thing is, I think that I mean, like what was that story that the ice cap is irrevocably moving? The whole ice cap, so it's like there's nothing you can do to stop it. And there was some column I read recently which talked about how the Earth will survive, and it adjusts, survives, it copes. It's just people that are going to go. So, you know, I mean, if you want to be optimistic, you can say, well, we're going to go, but at least there'll be something left, and it'll you know, morph into something new on that note.
Daniel Quinn said about that idea, this kind of gets back to the boiling lobster. He talks about, as opposed to the takers and the environmentalists, he talks about the takers and the leavers. And this is what he says about the takers. He said, first they exterminate their competitors, which is something that never happens in the wild. In the wild, animals defend their territories and their kills, and they will invade their competitors' territories and preempt their kills. But they never hunt competitors down just to make them dead, the way ranchers and farmers do with coyotes and foxes. What they hunt, they eat. He also said that the takers systematically destroy their competitors' food to make room for their own. Nothing like this occurs in the natural community. The rule there is take what you need and leave the rest alone. He said 3 things, so it's interesting. Okay. And the takers deny their competitors access to food. In the wild, the rule is you may deny your competitors access to what you're eating, but you may not deny them access to food in general. In other words, you can say, this gazelle is mine, but you can't say, all the gazelles are mine. The lion defends its kill as its own, but it doesn't defend the herd as its own. So that's where we go wrong with the lobsters, because perhaps not in the eating of the lobster, but in the fishing territories and what you can fish. And that's where it all falls apart, the clam beds or the, you know, whatever. So it's, the basic thing is all I can eat are beans, if we replant them. He also says that diversity is a survival factor for the community itself. And when we, obviously, when we deplete so much, it would we're depleting our own environment as well. But I think that's also, so much of what environmentalism has become. It's a very narcissistic point of view. It's like, oh my God, if we destroy the world, we're going to destroy ourselves. And that seems to be what is motivating people, which I think is understandable. As a species, we value our own. I think every species does that. Thomas Berry suggested, in talking about what the role of the human is, that we are the consciousness of the universe. That is, Thomas Berry was a Catholic theologian and priest, and he did, I think, as his underpinnings that there was a point to human existence, and he said that we were the beings that were meant to be conscious, to be able to go out and look at the world from the moon and to see it in its entirety. But even that, I think, is kind of narcissistic. And again, it gives rise to this idea that human consciousness is the best kind of consciousness. And we judge animals on if they use language or if they use tools. Well, that's how it is to be human. But I don't know how to be a jellyfish. I don't know how to be an ant. Ants do some pretty remarkable things. If you suddenly turned me into an ant, I'd be pretty lost. There is, in this thing about the chimpanzee that is suing for his freedom, one of the quotes is that there is the ever-growing body of scientific evidence pushing us into the distinctly discomforting corner of knowing that it isn't really there, meaning, in this case, the chimpanzee's likeness to us, but they're distinctly different and yet compellingly parallel complexity that now may command not just philosophical regard, but a legal one as well. Which is, and there's a lot written about that in the animal rights community. There's this guy, Peter Singer, who's a bioethicist at Princeton, and he has some pretty dramatic and controversial points of view. He's very active in the Animal Liberation Front, and he talks about. He uses the Bentham theory of can it suffer is what we're judging, can it suffer? And that should be the benchmark. He also has some really controversial points of view about children who are born with lives that will condemn them to suffering without other awareness. And so he has attracted some light notes on that score. You know what? We have, Philip, you want to put, I just have a short clip here by Brian Schwinn. Or is it Swin? It's Swin, not Schwinn. And he worked a lot with Thomas Berry. And I haven't actually seen it. It's just a brief clip. I'm glad that Brian Swin could end it on a positive note.